Is this mic on? I don't really need the mic, do I? Can everyone hear me? Okay, awesome. We can get off that podium. The mic's not.
Huh?
The mic's not working.
Oh, that's because I put the mute button on while you're trying the other thing.
Well, I'm going to unmute it.
There you go.
I encourage you to get into a seat where you can see the screen. Okay. I cannot with that. Hi everybody, welcome to Down to a Science. Bees. That's where you clap. I just want to tell you a couple brief things before we get started. One, I started this Science Cafe so that you can get the straight dope straight from the scientists, hear about what's going on that impacts all of us in our daily lives. So we tend to talk about topics like water, or what's going on with the bees, or earthquakes, stuff that's just going to intersect our local lives so that we can all band together and start making a difference around these issues. And it's a really great opportunity for you to get in action around an issue fueled from a scientific perspective. So I encourage you to all play full out tonight, ask a lot of questions, really get involved in this issue because it does impact all of us. In the case of tonight, the bee die-off may impact us in a big way. We may not be able to eat almonds anymore, which is kind of a big issue if you like almonds. So a couple notes about tonight's format. We're going to be watching a quick introductory video. It's about 10 minutes long. And then our speaker, Timothy, is going to come up and give a 10 to 15 minute presentation. And then we're just going to start opening it up to questions. And we should be done around 8:30. Anyone have any questions before we get started? Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start up the video. If you guys have trouble hearing, just raise your hand or shout out, and then I'll turn up the volume somehow. And what's being done just in the Bay Area and in Northern California. They produced a segment. It's actually airing tonight at 7:30, so you got a little sneak peek. And they've done some great work. They actually did a segment on Science Cafes just no more than a month ago. So I encourage you to check out their website. More information will be on mine. But let's continue the discussion on bees. I'm going to introduce our speaker for the evening. Your hair keeps getting in the way. Our speaker tonight is the Climate Action Coordinator for the City of Berkeley, and he's also an avid beekeeper and has been for a number of years. Please welcome Timothy Burroughs. I'll put up the presentation.
I guess I'll sit here. I feel like I should have maybe an acoustic guitar or something if I'm going to sit here in the spotlight. But
where's the control?
Can you hear me all right? Okay. Thanks, Keish, for having me. I do work for the City of Berkeley, and when I'm not working for the City of Berkeley, I'm often hanging out with my bees. I currently have two beehives located in my friend's backyard in the city of Richmond. But I'm a Berkeley resident. I've worked with bees off and on for almost since I was born. My dad was a beekeeper, and my dad's dad was a beekeeper, and I think my dad's dad was a beekeeper as well. So I'm a fourth or fifth in a long line of beekeepers. And I was thinking about, when Keisha asked me to come and talk about bees, I was thinking about why bees are something that I do. You know, why is it that I'm interested in keeping bees? And there's a couple of good reasons. One is that I put honey on absolutely everything. So it's nice to have my very own supply of honey that I consume a lot of and give a lot to my friends as well. Another big reason is that I'm very busy. I have a lot of shit to do. And well, the great thing about bees is that when I'm working with the bees, I am very much in the moment. You know, I am working solely with the bees. That's all I'm thinking about. And in a way, it's a great escape, or it's something to focus on. Some people watch TV, some people drink a lot. I keep bees. And I definitely encourage all of you to do that as well. And another big reason is that, you heard in the video about the colony collapse and the bee diseases and things like that. I like to think that by keeping a few bees in my friend's backyard, a few beehives in my backyard, that I'm somehow contributing to keeping the bee colonies alive and keeping the genetic diversity alive of this amazing creature. So again, I encourage all of you to do it, and we'll talk a little bit about how you might get started in a few minutes. So is that the thing?
I think it's the up and down button. You got to shoot it that way.
Okay. Okay, great. Let's try the right, left. It's not working.
It's the one that says up and down.
Oh.
Okay, Wendy will just do it.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. So, are honeybees native? Raise your hand if you think that honeybees are native to the U.S. Be honest, just if you don't, what do you think? Is your gut feeling that honeybees are native or are they non-native species? All right, non-native. Maybe that was an obvious one. So a little bit of a honeybee history for you. Honeybees were brought to the U.S. by the European colonists in about 1621. And honeybees really represented, for the Europeans, they really represented the agrarian philosophy. Honeybees and cows. The New World was looked upon by the Europeans as sort of a land of milk and honey. In fact, it was originally when Columbus stumbled upon the New World, he thought it was the Garden of Eden. And a land of milk and honey, that's sort of a declarative statement. It's something that the Europeans, they thought in order for the New World to sort of meet its potential for providing for the new settlers, there needed to be bees and there needed to be cows. And so Europeans were quick to bring honeybees and cows to the New World. And really what that did was that ended up transforming the landscape. The English especially thought that this land wasn't being used, even though it was being farmed in one way or another by the Native Americans. The Europeans used honeybees and cows to really increase the monoculture, and really transform the way that the early colonies looked. I wanted to take a moment and take a look inside a beehive. Wait a second. Not that kind of beehive. That kind of beehive. I'm sorry, I don't know who put that in there. Bees have for a long time represented industry and thrift. Bees are incredibly efficient with their space. They're incredibly efficient with their energy. They waste no space and they waste no energy. For example, the cells of a honeycomb, like you see there, are actually slanted upward so that gravity keeps the honey in the cells, so that no honey can actually leak out of the cells. Bees have very clearly defined tasks. So when a bee is born, a worker bee is born, the first job of the worker bee is really to be a maid, to clean up the cells and prepare those honeycombs for other bees to come in and put pollen and nectar inside the comb. The next stage of a honeybee's life is to actually receive nectar from bees that have been flying around to all the different flowers. And they take the nectar, and they take the pollen, and they put it inside the honeycomb. And then after that stage of their life, they start to do some test flights. They go out and fly around a little bit, and then fly back to the hive. And then finally they become full-fledged foragers, where they go out to all the different flowers and they gather the nectar and the pollen and bring back to the hive. During the nectar season, which around here is basically the spring, summer, and early fall, the lifespan of a bee is about 6 weeks. The lifespan of a queen bee can be up to 5 years. So it just depends on what type of bee you're talking about regarding the lifespan. But again, they have very clearly defined tasks. There are guard bees that stand at the entrance of a hive and make sure that no intruders come in. The bees have a system for keeping the colony at a very constant temperature of about 97 degrees, especially around where the eggs are. They have a ventilation system for cooling the hive, where they station themselves at various places within the hive and fan their wings and actually create some air conditioning. And in cold temperatures, they get all together, they bunch together, and they vibrate, and they create some friction, and they actually create warmth around where the eggs are. So they're a very organized social society, and it's something that the Europeans recognized at a very early stage and really sort of wanted to model their society after that. And it's something that we still recognize today when we use terms like busy as a bee and things like that. Next slide. So what about bees? Why are they such an important part of our society? Well, pollination was mentioned on the video. Up to about 1/3 of what we eat, it was one time pollinated or depended on pollination from honeybees. So that's 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat or something like that is dependent upon bees pollinating crops. And that includes meat, really, because bees pollinate a lot of the grasses that cows and other livestock depend on for their food. So pollination is incredibly important. And bees sort of pollinate by accident. As they go from flower to flower, they get pollen all over the hairs on their body, and they carry pollen from one flower to the next and pollinate. It's an important part of our agricultural system. And of course, honey is a very important product to us. Honey has a number of helpful properties. It's a good sudden boost of energy. Honey has antioxidants. Honey is used by some doctors on burns. Honey is also great for allergies, but especially local honey. They say, this is not proved scientifically, but a number of people that I know buy local honey and they say it improves their hay fever allergies. And of course, wax is another product of the beehive, which we use for candles, for polishing, and things like that. Next one. So you've probably seen in the store that a number of the honeys have different shades. They look a little bit different. And the reason for that is that honey, the way that a honey looks and the way that honey tastes is very much dependent on the flower from which the bees got the nectar they used to create that honey. So clover honey is probably the most widespread honey in the States. Clover is that little white flower that you see in a lot of open fields. It creates a lot of very light honey, very light and very tasty. And buckwheat honey, for example, is very dark. So it very much depends on the flower that gets busy as far as the color of the honey goes. You can go to the next slide. So just real quickly, before I talk a little bit about some of the threats to bees, I want to just give you a breakdown of what's going on inside the hive. So you have the queen. The queen is the mother of every bee in the hive. The queen lays about 1,000 to 2,000 eggs every single day. She's the mother of every bee in the hive. She makes one flight outside of the hive in her lifetime, and that flight is to mate. That's the only flight she makes, and she mates with a number of different male bees, and then comes back and begins laying eggs almost immediately. She can sting, but she doesn't sting very often. Next slide. The workers are the female bees. So when you see a bee on a flower, it's always a female bee. The workers do it all. They gather the nectar, they gather the pollen, they clean the hives, they tend to the queen. They're also the ones that can sting. They have a barb on their stinger, so when they sting and then they fly away, the stinger stays in you and it sort of rips out their inside. So when a worker bee stings you, that's also the end of that bee's life. So the females are very much the energetic and busy ones in the hive. Next one. And then the drones are the male bees. And the drones really, their whole desire in life, a lot like mine, is to get laid over and over and over again. And most drones never get that opportunity, but drones, it's sort of a mysterious thing actually. Drones from a bunch of different hives will go to a certain field somewhere, and this has never been witnessed in nature. But drones will gather in a field and they'll just wait for a queen to fly by. And when a queen flies by, the drones will go after her, and they mate in midair. And when the lucky drone is able to mate, when he is pulling out, he dies. Everything is torn out of him, so it's his last deed. And a number of drones will mate with a given queen on her mating flight. Now in the winter, when honey stores get a little bit low and nectar and pollen is a little bit low, the worker bees will actually kick drones out of the hive. They kick them to the curb because really all drones are doing in the hive is consuming. It's consuming food that the colony needs to get through hard times. So you'll witness, if you watch a hive, you'll witness that in the season where there's not much nectar coming in, you'll witness drones being stung and just kicked out of the entrance of the hive. The fascinating to watch. So what's going on with all of these threats to bees? It's a hard time to be a bee, and it's a hard time to be a beekeeper. One of the original threats to bee colonies was the Varroa mite. The scientific name for this mite is Varroa destructor, which is an incredibly menacing name for a bee. The Varroa mite showed up from Europe in 1987, and by 1994, an estimated 98% of wild bee colonies were eliminated. So you may not know this, but actually wild bees are almost extinct. There are very few colonies of bees just living in the woods somewhere. They just don't exist. Mainly because of the Varroa mite, which attaches itself to a bee's abdomen and it causes a lot of different defects, including wing deformations that just kill the bee. And you can see just on the bottom of that bee right there is a Varroa mite right there, and they tend to attach themselves to bees in the larva stage. So the bees they kill the most are bees that are sort of in the development stage. Bees that you see on the flowers are largely from hives that beekeepers are tending. And beekeepers have figured out a lot of different ways to treat the Varroa mite, and the Varroa mite is also sort of cyclical. Some years they're much more devastating than others. One of the natural treatments for Varroa mites that bees are trying these days is actually just powdered sugar. And they sprinkle all the bees in the hive with powdered sugar, and Varroa mites have a harder time attaching themselves to the bee. There's a lot of chemical treatments as well that beekeepers use. And sometimes beekeepers feel like that's the only choice they have is to use chemical treatment. But those treatments can be misused, and the danger is that Varroa mites will build up a tolerance to the chemical treatments and will no longer be effective. And the big one that people are talking about, and they talked about in the video, is colony collapse disorder. And colony collapse disorder has mostly hit commercial beekeepers. And what you see on that slide is an example of how commercial beekeepers operate. They transport thousands of beehives from the East Coast to the West Coast. For example, when the almond crop needs pollinators, East Coast beekeepers will ship their hives out to the West Coast and put those hives on the almond crops, and the bees will pollinate those flowers in order to get larger sets of almonds. Beekeepers are paid anywhere from $50 to $150 per hive just to have the hive on a farmer's crop, on a farmer's land. Sure. So it's actually pretty lucrative for beekeepers to do. Beekeepers will send. I just got laughed at. Are you a beekeeper? Okay, maybe it hasn't been lucrative for you.
Very, very expensive. You're better off opening a laundromat.
Better off opening a laundromat. Actually, I have a friend in Maryland that makes $175,000 a year on pollination alone. So it can be lucrative, but it's just like any other business. It's hard, it's a lot of work, and it can be a grind. And especially when colony collapse disorder comes into play, and a commercial beekeeper loses up to 75–80% of his hives. That's a beekeeper's capital. So what's the deal with colony collapse disorder? Well, here's what it looks like as far as I understand. And I should say that this is a science cafe, but I'm definitely not a scientist. I'm a beekeeper that reads a lot about bees and has been keeping bees for a long time, but I'm definitely not a scientist. But when colony collapse disorder occurs, honey is usually still present in the hive, and some eggs and some young bees, and sometimes the queen. But a lot of the adult bees have just disappeared. They're no longer in the hive, they're not dead in the hive, they're not dead in front of the hive. They're just gone, which is sort of what makes colony collapse disorder unique. Whereas if a colony is attacked by a mite or something, you'll see dead bees in front of the hive or in the hive. Oftentimes when a hive has honey in it, a stronger colony of bees will come in and rob that honey from that colony. But the weird thing about colony collapse disorder is that they've noticed that when it occurs, other bees are not even going in there to steal the honey that exists there, which means there's probably something in the hive that's deterring, it's not only killing bees, but it's deterring outside bees from actually going into that colony, which is really strange. Many commercial beekeepers are losing 90% of their hives, and there's a lot of different potential causes that have been bounced around. So cell phone towers was probably the most unique and the most entertaining. I think I saw that first on the BBC. and that has since been discredited. But most people, so I should say that we still don't know what causes colony collapse disorder. But most scientists are saying now that it's probably a combination of things. And it's probably rooted in the fact, because it's affecting commercial beekeepers most, it's probably rooted in the fact that these bees are fatigued. They're being shipped from coast to coast to coast. And as I was just talking to Keish about, when I make a trip from the east to the west coast, I'm exhausted. And when I go back, I'm exhausted. And I'll often get a cold, like on my plane ride back or something like that, because my body is more susceptible. And the same thing goes for bees. So when you combine fatigue with incredible use of pesticides and insecticides and chemicals, parasite loads like mites that are constantly attacking the bees, and all of that combines, they're saying it's probably what really colony collapse disorder is. It's not just one mite or one parasite, it's a series of things that are attacking colonies that are already compromised. But again, we still don't know. So one other threat to bees that people love to talk about is the Africanized honeybee, killer bee. And this is a pretty cool map that actually shows by year where killer bees have shown up in the United States. And you can see that it's mostly in the south. And the darker color up on top is showing up in 1990. You can come through, go for it. And then all the way down to 2005, you see a lot of Africanized bees showed up in Florida in 2005. Southern Texas in the southern part of the United States. The Africanized honeybee is almost 100% an African bee, but these bees apparently escaped from Brazil. I've heard a couple of different characterizations of this, but it is a hybrid. It's mostly Africanized honeybee, but it is a mix, and the bees escaped from Brazil. The bees are, I've worked with African honeybees before when I lived in West Africa, and the bees are very hard to manage. They abscond from their hives quite a bit. They don't like to stay in one place very long. They're very hard to manage because they're very pissed off, and as soon as you open up the hive, they go after you. They sting a lot more. The venom in an Africanized honeybee is not any stronger than the venom in a European honeybee, the kind of bees that we keep in our apiaries in our backyards. But the thing that's sort of threatening and menacing about them is that they sting more often, and they're sort of more agitated or agitatable. But the horror stories are also not true. They do not go around searching for things to attack and swarm on. But they are just a bit more. They're just a bit more aggressive. And what they do is they can take over European colonies, and so it is a threat to beekeepers because they're harder to manage and harder for beekeepers to maintain. So those are the main threats to bees. I was going to talk a little bit about how you manage or how you start up with your backyard bees. But I'll open it up for questions now, or I don't know if Keish wants to take a break, and then we can talk about that a little bit.
We'll open it up for questions now. And after the break, we'll come back and talk about resources in case you want to start your own beehive and the steps you would have to take. So if you're interested in asking a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring the mic around. Actually, I think it's cozy enough that you could just a low shout and Timothy will be able to hear you. So let's open up the questions right now.
And other beekeepers here are welcome to help out in answering the questions as well. Yeah.
Is this a worldwide problem, or is this isolated to North America?
Colony collapse disorder, I think we're hardest hit in North America, but they're also experiencing it some in Europe now as well. Is that what you've heard?
I know very little about it except what I've read, and I've yet to meet a beekeeper that suffered from it, so I don't know what to say.
Exactly, and either have I. It's been largely the commercial beekeepers that experienced it, and largely in North America. Yeah. Yeah.
I heard or read somewhere that commercial beekeepers manipulate the size of their cells to coax the bees to be bigger. Is that true, or do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that's actually been, that was something that even the early beekeepers experimented with. So there has been some experimentation with making and how would a beekeeper do that? Well, I wish I had a hive here to show you, but basically a hive, it almost looks like a dresser. You know, there's sections, you know, one on top of the other, and within each section is called a super. And each section is sort of a hollow box with no top or no bottom. And within each section or super, there's 10 frames. And those frames are what contain the honeycomb. And beekeepers will put a wax foundation on each frame. And that foundation is what is sort of a starter for the bees. It's made of wax usually, sometimes plastic coated with wax. And it already contains the general sort of outline of honeycomb. And then the bees build that out, they put more wax into it, and they build it out so that they can actually put honey in it. And so you can manipulate the size of honeycomb by the type of foundation that you put inside the frame.
So conceivably that could be adding to the fatigue, like the sort of manipulation of that.
Conceivably, that's not something that I've read or heard anywhere. Yeah.
As colony collapse sort of becomes a bigger problem, is there any movement to start managing other pollinators at all?
Yeah. There's there's a bee called a blue orchard bee. It's a stingless bee that a lot of backyard beekeepers are using. It's a stingless bee that it doesn't, you know, create honey or anything like that, but it's a great pollinator, and they just live in little holes, little tubes in a piece of wood or something like that. And stingless bees already do a lot of pollinating around here. They're already a big part of the pollination effort. But there is a movement towards figuring out what are the other alternatives to just using honeybees. Although I haven't heard of that on a large scale, nothing to the degree that we use honeybees for, nothing even close at this point.
You mentioned a third of the reproduction on honeybees. Is that current?
That's current. Yeah, that's current.
And I'm curious, you didn't mention climate change. Your other question on what impact was that have?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and a couple of beekeeping associations have started to talk about that, the impact of global warming on honeybees. And the main impact comes from the shift in bloom patterns. And so when flowers are blooming earlier than the bees are ready for them to bloom, there's sort of a confusion in sort of the life cycle of the bee, and the bees are, you know, sort of thrown out of whack. And so that shift in blooming patterns, the shift in seasons, is impacting bee colonies. And I've actually heard of specific instances of that on the East Coast, more so than on the West Coast. But I've heard beekeepers in the U.S. talking about how bee honey production has decreased because of the onset of earlier blooming periods on the East Coast. So that's something that there's been basically no research whatsoever into that particular question, except for just local beekeepers and their experience. Other questions?
How many times have you been stung?
Wow, thousands of times. When I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, and I had a couple of hives there, and we were making hives out of just local materials, out of like palm baskets and things like that. And managing Africanized bees is a whole different story. In the U.S., when you're working with bees here, my bees are pretty calm. You know, I go in without gloves. They usually wear a veil because bees don't like beards. So I go in without gloves, and I've barely been stung by the bees. When they're busy, they don't really care about you as long as there's nectar. If you go into a hive here and it's kind of rainy or really humid, then they're more likely to get agitated. But Africanized bees, you work at night, and the main reason is that you don't want them to be able to see you. Like you want to be able to get away as quickly as you can if you need to, or you just don't want to be as visible. And it was amazing. I remember the first time I opened up an Africanized colony, and as soon as the lid was off, I had bees just bouncing off my head, you know. And I was coming from an experience where bees were pretty mellow, and I was like, oh, I'm sure it's not going to be that bad. And there were a couple of times where I took, 20 or 30 stings at one night, and just my veins were coursing with bee venom. So I've been stung a lot over there, especially, and over here I just get stung occasionally, and I build up a tolerance to where I don't really get any kind of swelling or anything like that. I don't know what
So what impact will Africanized bees, if they replace the honeybee population, have on pollination, if at all?
It will have a, you know, beekeepers always say, well, we're just going to have to learn how to work with them. You know, we're just going to have to learn how to manage the Africanized honeybee. We're going to have to be able to provide the same services that we provide now. But it's going to make it incredibly more difficult to manage a hive or to manage a set of hives. And so, and for a number of reasons, not only because they're more aggressive, but because they tend to abscond. They tend to evacuate their hives very often, so they're harder to keep in one place. And so it's going to be harder to sort of commercially manage bees and have them pollinate and produce honey. Do you have something else?
Yeah, I would say that even worse than the difficulty of managing the bees is the difficulty the commercial beekeeper will have finding a location to keep his bees because of all these efforts. That's far worse, because you can keep replacing queens. If you go down to Central America, commercial beekeepers are coping with the Africanized honeybee. But imagine if you have no place to keep your bees.
Yeah, which is even a problem. You know, that's even a challenge without Africanized honeybees. There's sort of, you know, the obvious stigma attached to bees, and people have a fear of them. And so imagine if Africanized honeybees make it. Now the thing about it is that they say that the climate in the Bay Area in Northern California will in and of itself prevent Africanized honeybees ever making it up this far. It's not a climate that Africanized honeybees could exist in.
Except it's warming up.
Except it's warming up. Yep. Oh, okay.
I can't relate, so forgive me if you address this, but is there a sense of what proportion of the pollinating European honeybees are?
What proportion of the pollinating European honeybees are doing?
How much of the pollination that there is being done are honeybees?
Oh, yeah. What is quoted often is a third of the food that we eat was pollinated by honeybees. So that's huge. Yeah.
I would say that the way to really understand it is that here in California we grow an awful lot of crops for seed sold all around the country and all around the world. And producing these seeds, they very much rely on honeybees for pollination. So a farmer in the Midwest who might be growing sunflowers might be buying a seed from California that relied on honeybees for pollination.
Many of the fruits that we eat, strawberries, watermelons, are dependent on bees. And as I was saying earlier, the grasses that our livestock eat are also pollinated by bees. So that's how it sort of cuts into a larger percentage of the food that we depend on.
I've also heard that 1/3 of our food, but I've heard that was for all the animal pollinators, are other native bees and birds and things basically negligible compared to honeybees.
Yeah, I've read that the third was sort of specific to the honeybee. So, but you know that it does seem like pretty hard to believe, but that is what I've read in a number of different places.
I'm just curious, actually, more about this the queen. And
yes.
You said she lives 5 years, but she only makes one flight out. How many eggs does she create then with all that sex?
Yeah, she mates. You know, she mates with a number of drones in that one flight and stores the sperm, and she lays 1,000 to 2,000 eggs every day during the honey flow. So the amount of eggs that a queen lays in a hive is very much dependent on how much nectar is coming into that hive. So during the nectar flow, during the spring and the summer, when the workers are bringing in all that nectar, that encourages her to lay. And then as nectar stops coming in, as the blooms decrease and as the temperature goes down, she will lay less because the idea is that the bee colony will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you want it to be as big as possible when there's flowers out, and you want it to be as small as possible when there's less flowers. So her laying is completely dependent on the nectar flow. A strong queen will lay about 1,000 to 2,000 eggs per day, and 5 years is on sort of the extreme end for the life of a bee, a queen bee. Usually it's probably 1 to 2 years, and oftentimes when queen production starts to decrease, the beekeeper, one of the ways a beekeeper manages his or her hive is to actually replace the bee with a new young queen. Mm-hmm.
Let's take 2 more questions before we take a break.
One of the things you might want to point out is the queen bee has this vessel that holds all the sperm she gets for her entire life, and she actually has the capacity and the capability to divvy out that sperm, so that sometimes she uses it, sometimes she doesn't. She will not use the sperm that she's creating the drone bees, the male bees. And one of the difficult aspects of the problem we're having with the Burroughs is the Burroughs prefers the drone bee. And because the drones are suffering, it's very possible that one of the difficulties we're having beekeeping these days is we're not getting properly mated queens. We're just not getting the insemination that we were fading earlier.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the interesting things about the bee's gestation too is that the queen can lay a fertilized or an unfertilized egg. An unfertilized egg will be born as a drone, and a fertilized egg will be born as a worker. And every fertilized egg that a queen lays has the potential to turn into a queen. And all of that is dependent upon what the worker bees feed that egg or larva. So a fertilized egg that is born and turns into a larva or pupa that's fed royal jelly throughout the entire gestation period will develop into a queen. Whereas a worker bee also starts out as a fertilized egg, but it's only fed royal jelly during a couple of the three first days of its gestation period, and then it's fed, I guess, what's sometimes called worker jelly, and then that bee will become a worker. And worker bees, when a queen is accidentally killed or absconded or something, a worker bee can actually lay eggs, but a worker bee can only lay unfertilized eggs. And so if you open up your hive and you see a massive amount of drone bees, male bees, you know that there's something incredibly wrong, and that colony is basically doomed. Mm-hmm.
So, as far as they're talking about genetic diversity among
Yeah.
different hives, so is there any way to do kind of like a drone dispersal system where you pull the drone out and put it to the next colony there?
So in trying to improve the genetic diversity by
relocating or like dispersing them against their will.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the way that there's artificial insemination of queens, obviously, and that's one way of trying to increase the diversity. But also but as far as picking drones out of certain hives and figuring out a way to help them mate with a queen, that doesn't sound like that's something. I mean, at least in the wild, beekeepers don't know, scientists don't know exactly how that occurs. We don't see bees mating in the wild. And so it's hard to sort of, at least in the wild, it's hard to sort of address the genetic diversity issue. Like I said, you can do it through artificial means and artificial insemination, but I don't know of any other way to do it. I don't know how you can. Well, even if you put a drone from one hive in another hive, that doesn't guarantee that drone would mate with the queen. Because they don't mate inside the hive, they mate outside of the hive. Yeah.
One of the fascinating problems with the Africanized honeybees is apparently the African bee drones are more aggressive about mating with queens. And that's why they're spreading so viciously.
Other questions? Yeah.
So if the queen is reproducing, if they're creating drones without sperm, does that mean that the drones are cloned? Or is that the genetic material identity?
Yeah. Yeah, that is what that means.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and take a 5-minute break for people to get drinks and order more food from the bar. And after the break, we're gonna come back and Timothy's gonna talk about what it would take to start your own hive, what the benefits are, if anyone is actually interested, and then we're gonna dive back into more Q&A. you everybody for being here tonight.
Oh, yeah.
There is one slide.
No, it's easy to turn back on. No, we'll just leave it.
You can leave it.
Okay.
Okay, so I had mentioned, one of the issues around colony collapse disorder is the lack of not only bee fatigue, but also the lack of diversity in the genetics. Bees have sort of, commercial beekeepers really have treated bees a lot like we treat a number of other of our agricultural products, like our cattle and other major forms of livestock, where it's sort of mass production and sort of industrialized. And there's been a loss of genetic diversity in the commercial colonies, which one of the hypotheses is that that's one of the reasons why there's been such a collapse. And that's also, like I mentioned, one of the reasons why I'm interested in being a beekeeper, because I feel like I'm contributing in some very small way to maintaining some genetic diversity in local bee colonies. So there's a lot of good reasons to be a beekeeper. Honey makes great gifts. It makes great conversations on long road trips and in bars like this. And like I said, it's also just a great way to sort of get in tune with your local surroundings. All beekeepers are probably know better than anybody when flowers bloom and what flowers are what, and they just know, they know these things, and it's a cool bit of knowledge to have. So if you want to get involved in beekeeping, there's a couple of different ways to go about doing it. First, you want to figure out where you want to keep your bees, and bees can be kept, almost anywhere. I've seen beekeepers keep their bees on a roof, a nice flat roof. There's a lot of urban beekeepers that even have bees on balconies. I have my bees in a backyard, and European bees are generally safe. The one thing you don't want to do is stand right in front of a hive, get in front of the flight path, or if you step on a bee, or if the bees feel threatened, then they'll sting. But beekeepers are going into a hive, and so it's almost expected that a bee would be defensive when that's being done. But when you see a bee on a flower or something like that, the chances of getting stung by a bee are very minimal. But all that said, you want to give your bees as much space as possible, even if it's just because people are uncomfortable. A lot of people are uncomfortable around bees. You don't want to make your neighbors feel uncomfortable. So you want to find a good space. You generally want to have enough space in front of the hive that bees can come in and out like an airport. And you need to have a couple of things nearby. You need to have some sort of water source. So if there's not a natural stream or lake around, then you can actually just provide a bucket of honey and throw some sticks in it so that the bees can land on the sticks, or a bucket of water, I'm sorry, and throw some sticks in it so the bees can land on the sticks and drink the water. Ideally, you want to look around and see that there's a good floral source around. Although where I have my bees in Richmond, there is not one particular field of flowers that I've been able to identify that the bees are hitting up, and they're producing honey like crazy. I'm going to have upwards of 100 pounds of honey this season, and that's only 2 hives that are relatively new to this area. So floral source and water are 2 big ones. Bees need to have some kind of windbreak, and some sort of partial shade in the evening, late afternoon is also good. So how do you start bees? Where do you get them? There's a couple of different ways to do that. One is you can order package bees. And package bees generally come in 2, 3, or 5 pound packages. And they're mostly produced down in the southern part of the United States. And you can actually just go online and order a package of bees. I think the going rate for a package is what, like $50, $60?
Depends how many you buy.
Depends on how many pounds, but for like a 3 pound package of bees. And they send them in the mail, and the postmaster will, you'll either get them delivered directly to your house, or the postmaster will call you up very quickly and say, come get these bees out of the post office really quick. And they come in sort of a package that it kind of has wood on 2 sides, and then it's basically made of screening, so there's a lot of ventilation for the bees. It comes with a queen, and you basically just pour the bees directly into your hive to make sure you get the queen inside your hive, and once the queen is inside your hive, all the other bees will follow. Yeah?
I've got to make a plug for our local Beekeepers Association. We have a Beekeepers Club, And we just take orders from everybody and make one mass order, so we get the volume discount. And we'll buy them from the local beekeepers so that they don't have to go through the postal system, pay all the freight charges. And so it's a little more convenient, a little easier on the bees, and a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, that's great. An in like that is a really good thing to have. The other thing, other than getting packages, is you can get what are called nucleus hives, or are often called nukes. And a nuke is how I actually started my couple of hives that I have here. You go to a beekeeper, and a beekeeper will sell you a couple of frames full of bees and honey and brood. And so each one of my hives started with 5 of those frames. There was 2 frames that had eggs and larvae in them, 2 frames that had honey, and another frame that had pollen or something like that. And the advantage of getting a nucleus hive is that they can build up a lot quicker because there's already eggs in the hive that are going to hatch and be born, and your hive is going to get a lot bigger and a lot stronger a lot faster. Whereas if you just buy a package of bees, the bees are basically starting from scratch when you put them inside your hive. So a nuke is the quickest way to get your bees up and running as quickly as possible. Another way to start with bees is to catch a swarm. And swarms are really a reproduction mechanism for bees, for a colony of bees. A colony of bees, when a colony of bees swarms, it's basically splitting in half. And what happens is, a colony will swarm for any number of reasons. Mainly a colony will swarm because they feel like they're running out of space in their current location. And so the worker bees will sense this, and they will raise a new queen. And when that new queen is born, the old queen, the original queen, will leave the hive with about half of the colony. And they'll go search out a new home. And then the new queen will stay inside the original hive with the other half. And so one colony has then become 2. And oftentimes swarms will land like on a tree branch or on the gutter of a house or on a light post or something like that. And a beekeeper can very easily go and capture that swarm. And it's not really rocket science how you capture a swarm. You basically just, in any way you can, in the gentlest way you possibly can, you try to get all those bees inside a hive box or inside any type of box, and then dump them into your hive. It's, you know, it's blunt, to tell you the truth, but it works. And the rest of the colony will follow the queen bee. The queen has a pheromone, a scent that sort of identifies the colony with her. And so once a queen is inside a hive box, the other bees will sense that and they will follow her, and you'll see bees just sort of marching into a hive as if they're an army marching to battle or something, or some other metaphor. So that's really the 3 main ways: is buying a package of bees, getting a nuke, or catching a swarm. And all 3 are viable for even any really beginner beekeeper. I think when I started out just with 2 colonies, it took me probably in between $400 and $500 to buy the suit and the veil that Keish is modeling. I had to buy a smoker, which we use to sort of, in a way, you're sedating the bee. It's not really sedation, but the theory is that when you smoke a colony, the bees feel like they think that the hive is on fire, and so they go down and they consume honey, as if, you know, if they're going to fly away, they want to fly away with their belly full of honey. So you'll see them kind of go back down into the colony, and they become much more easy to manage when you give them a little bit of smoke, just a little bit. So the smoker, the suit, a couple of tools, the hive bodies, and then the bees themselves probably cost me altogether about $500. And if I were to sell them all the honey that I'm producing this year, I could probably, you know, make that back in just a year, to tell you the truth. So I'm not going to sell it. I'm probably going to give it all away and eat it, but I could make it back really quickly if I wanted to. So again, it's about finding a spot, getting your bees, getting a few pieces of equipment, and what you're doing is you're contributing to keeping the population of bees alive and kicking. And another cool thing to do is to purchase local honey. Local honey is better for you anyway, so when you go to the farmer's market or go to the store, try to get honey that's produced in, you know, the Bay Area, and support your local beekeepers, and it's better for your allergies. and look into putting some native plants and flowers in your yard, or do some research about the types of flowers that honeybees like, and try to populate your yard with those types of plants and flowers to keep the bee population thriving in this area anyway. So that's how you get started. Does anybody have any questions about that? Or anything else about that? Yeah.
So what's the honey harvesting process like?
The honey harvesting process? Well, as I mentioned, the hive basically is a series of sections or supers, and the two bottom sections are generally what we call the brood chamber, and they're deeper supers. And those are the two supers that at the least you want to not harvest. You want to keep that amount of honey and brood there for the bees to get through the winter and get through the seasons where there's a dearth of nectar. Any supers on top of that are shallower supers, they're not quite as deep, and those are the honey supers. And oftentimes beekeepers will put a queen excluder in between the deep supers and the shallow supers so that the queen can't get up into the top supers and lay eggs, because you want those top supers to just be honey supers. So the worker bees can get through, but the queen bee's abdomen is a little wider, so she can't get through the small space on these queen excluders. And basically the process is, when you're ready to extract honey, you go out and I think the easiest way to do it, I'd be interested to hear how you do it. The way that I do it is I take a fume board that has a kind of a nasty scent on it that the bees don't like, and I put it on top of the hive. And all the bees will drive down into the bottom of the hive. They'll go out of the top section of the hive, and then I can remove that top section, and there won't be any bees in it, or just a few bees in it. So I have a full super of honey with 10 frames, all full of honey. Take that home. When a frame of honey is full, the bees will cap it with a thin layer of wax. And so you take a hot knife, you cut off that capping, and then you put those frames inside an extractor. An extractor is really simple. It basically uses centrifugal force to throw the honey out of the frame. So you can put a series of frames inside these cages within an extractor. There's manual extractors, or there's electric ones that spin around very quickly, throw the honey out, goes to the bottom of the extractor, open the tap, pour it into a bucket, and then from the bucket you put the honey directly into your jars or in your squeeze bottles or whatever. Sometimes beekeepers will strain the honey just to get like bee wings and things out of it. Some people really like what they call raw honey, which is just basically honey that's not even extracted. But much of the local honey, in a way, it's just honey straight from the extractor, straight from the hive into the jar. There's nothing done to it. Some of the commercial honey is boiled, or they'll add. What are the commercial, the large-scale commercial beekeepers add in the honey to get more out of it?
They don't add anything to it. They run it through very, very fine filters.
Run it through filters.
They heat it, run it through filters.
Yeah. And that's the extraction process. And oftentimes you'll see honey that's crystallized, that's turned into what it looks kind of like sugar. Now honey never goes bad. It will never go bad. It won't spoil. You can always eat it years from now. It'll be fine, but it will crystallize. And that's okay. And some people like crystallized honey, but if you want to turn your crystallized honey back into liquid honey, you heat up some water almost to the point of boiling hot water, turn off the stove, and then put your jar of honey directly in the hot water, and that crystallized honey will turn back into liquid honey.
What about the comb? Do you do anything with the comb at all, personally?
I personally don't harvest comb honey, but a lot of beekeepers do. I love comb honey, great on biscuits, and that's a different kind of frame. The frame that I use is just a frame of straight comb, but there are specific frames that have been designed to make it easier to actually harvest sections of comb, where there's sort of a hollowed out circle inside the frame, and the bees will fill that, and it's easy for the beekeeper to just sort of cut that out and extract it. But I've never actually harvested comb honey before. Yeah?
So do you have the extractor in your home or in your yard? Or?
I'm a member of the Alameda County Bee Association, and the Bee Club has an extractor that the club members can use. So I just borrow it over a weekend and extract all the honey over a couple of weekends.
And the other thing was, I'm not sure if you mentioned this at the beginning or not, but what was your impetus to start doing this? mentor? Like what just made you decide to do it?
Yeah.
When did you start?
Yeah, I started when I was just a kid. My dad was a beekeeper. So when I was just growing up, I was always helping my dad move hives or extract honey. And then I always enjoyed it ever since I was just a type. So it made sense. And then when I went to, when I left home and went to college, I lived in this group house and we had a couple of hives in our backyard. And ended up being an amazing place for bees, amazing nectar sources. Our 2 hives produced about 100 pounds of honey each in one season for 2 years in a row. We sold all the honey on campus under the auspices of saying that we were going to use the proceeds to do a campus cleaning project and buy trees and do some tree planting and stuff, and then we just ended up buying a lot of kegs. So. It was worth it. Yeah.
More questions about colony collapse or anything else mentioned? Or on the right side there?
How do bees make royal jelly? Royal jelly is a natural byproduct of the bee. So royal jelly is sort of a something that bees produce through sort of adding a series of enzymes and proteins, and it's sort of a natural product that bees produce in their bodies. I don't know the exact science behind the royal jelly, but it's sort of the same way that bees produce wax. Bees have wax cells underneath the wax glands that they produce. They also produce royal jelly through, it's a different product obviously, but it's something that the bees produce from their body. And honey is basically, almost 100% nectar. It's when nectar is brought back to the hive, it contains a fair amount of water. It's mostly water, and bees basically evaporate that water content down, add an enzyme, a natural enzyme from their bodies to it to produce honey. So it's almost just nectar straight from the flower, to tell you the truth. What's the most intriguing thing I've learned about bee culture? Well, beekeeper culture. Does that count? Beekeeper culture is pretty interesting. I've been to a lot of different bee clubs around different parts of the country, and beekeepers are a pretty interesting bunch of people. Beekeepers tend to be, fairly eccentric in a lot of ways. I'm usually the youngest person at a bee club as well. But it's always a lot of fun. Beekeepers have a lot of fun together, and they're kind of dorky about bees. But as far as the bees themselves, there's a lot of really interesting things. I mean, the whole thing about bee communication is really intriguing. Bees communicate in a lot of different ways. When a colony is ready to swarm, a bee colony, scouts go out into nature and look for a credible place for the hive to swarm, and then comes back to the colony and communicates where they think a good spot is. Bees communicate to one another about good sources of nectar or good sources of water through doing a figure-8 dance, or there's a couple of different dances that bees do on the comb to communicate to one another. And just sort of how incredibly sort of advanced they are as a society has been the most interesting thing for me to witness.
So, okay, I don't want to start a hive, but you mentioned planting native plants and the positive impact that would have. Can you expound upon that? Like, why is planting native plants going to help, and how is that going to, intersect overall bee health?
Right. Well, planting native plants mainly is broader than just for honeybees. I mean, planting native flowers is really. In fact, on the video, there was a woman from UC Berkeley, and I think she's part of a native bee project at UC Berkeley. So planting native plants is something, basically you're giving native bees something to forage. And so that's why there's value in native plants. Now, the honeybees do forage on a lot of the native flowers in the Bay Area. but honeybees also appreciate some non-native flowers as well. So the reason I mentioned native ones is just because sort of across the board for Bay Area foragers, the best way to attract those foragers to your yard or to your garden is by planting native plants that have native flowers.
Well, we have time for, I think, one more question before we close. So does anyone else have a question? No? Any last comments on Timothy?
Thanks for having me. I was happy to be able to come and talk about bees. And if you have any questions that come up, or if you want to start your own colonies, then feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I don't know if you want to put my information on your website or something like that.
Put it all over it.
Yeah, but I'm happy to help out. And there's a club in San Francisco. There's a San Francisco Bee Club, and there's an Alameda County Bee Club, which I'm a part of, which are also on Keisha's website. So definitely check it out and make sure you buy local honey.
Thanks, Timothy.
Just a couple of closing remarks before we wrap up. One, there's a sign-up sheet going around. If you haven't signed up for our email list, that's the best way to keep up to date on what's coming up at Down Go Science. So definitely take a second and fill it out. Secondly, let's give Timothy another big hand for an awesome presentation. Is there anything interesting, and just one comment, of all the topics we've covered so far, this is our 4th Science Cafe, this is like the first issue where I felt like personal involvement really intersected the science. There's something that all of us could literally go home and do tonight, tomorrow, over the weekend that would have a positive impact.